welcome to this episode of Simplifying the Law. With me today, I have two state counsel from the Attorney General's Chambers and Ministry of Legal Affairs, Miss Patricia Shepard and Mr. Tikaram Singh. They will help me to go through the Planning and Development Single Window System Act 2023 that was recently enacted. I'm your host, Richard Bainey, and as usual, I hope that we have a packed program with lots to discuss. Well, it's not really a heavy legislation, but we'll try to see how much we could get out of it as possible. This is a revolutionary piece of legislation that was pushed by the government of Guyana because what it does is brings together multiple agencies under one roof. So persons who are building or renovating or seeking permissions for construction, whether it is personal or commercial, this legislation creates a framework to develop the authority whereby you can go and lodge all of your forms and applications, and it is processed under one roof, and you go back there and you're able to retrieve after a certain amount of time which would be indicated to you. Persons know the hassle, the struggle it is to go through the bureaucratic process of running, as people would say, here, there, and everywhere. To get permissions when building or constructing, they would have to go to NDCs and Central Housing and Planning Authority or wherever it may be. And this is a very tedious task. So what this legislation does is to eliminate that burden. And what we've seen recently in Guyana is an explosion in the building and construction sectors, primarily commercial, but there are a lot of residential building going on. The house lots initiative, the young professionals and the ordinary house lots that persons are applying for, which are being rapidly allocated, I must say. These are all major projects which has since boosted Guyana's economy. And not only did it bring a boost to the economy, but it brought a boost in the workload. So there are way much more applications to be processed, and it's a heavy workload. So this legislation implements the system to deal with that in a more condign and efficient or effective manner. So if I'll just take it over to Patricia and Tikaram now, I'll just briefly ask you to introduce yourself and the work that you do before we get into the legislation.
All right, thank you, Richard. So I am Patricia Shepard. I'm a state counsel assigned to the litigation department of the Attorney General's Chambers. What we do in the litigation department is, like every attorney, we would draft pleadings based on what we were assigned, whether it's a defense. Sometimes we even initiate matters. We sometimes have to render opinions for other government agencies, ministries, and so on, as assigned by the Attorney General. We even have to attend meetings sometimes outside of the ministry at other ministries or government agencies to get the work done. That is pretty much it.
Good morning. Thank you, Richard. My name is Tikaram Singh. I'm also State Counsel assigned to the Litigation Department of the Ministry of Legal Affairs and Attorney General's Chambers. So, as Ms. Shepard said, we basically do pleadings, and from a wonderful initiative started by the Honorable Attorney General, he started something where each State Counsel is assigned to at least 2 or 3 ministries, and we're liaisons to this ministry. So, in addition to our workload that we deal with every day, cases in court, we also liaise with ministries to system. Myself, I'm attached to the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs, the Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Health, and we're also assigned to various boards. I'm assigned to the Fire Advisory Board, the Fisheries Advisory Board, and the Amerindian Land Titling Project. I must take this opportunity, Richard, to thank the Honorable Attorney General for this initiative. As we all know, there are hundreds of legislation in this country, hundreds. And with each and every passing year, more and more legislations are being passed. And as we all know as lawyers, ignorance of the law is no excuse. So this is a timely initiative for the viewers out there to learn. Thank you, Richard.
Okay, thank you, Ray. So, if we could get directly into the act, right? Why did Parliament enact this legislation, the Planning and Development Single Window System Act 2023? The act was tabled in the National Assembly in 2022, and it was presented for first reading. It went to Select Committee. There was a consensus between the government and opposition members who comprised this special Select Committee, where the bill got unanimous support, and it went back to the House and it was passed. But importantly, I know I went through a bit of the basics, just scratching the surface, but if you could go through why this legislation was tabled, why it was important.
Yes, that's a wonderful question, Richard. So as you said, and which is very important to note, is that this bill went to a select committee, which was made up of both government and opposition members, and it was unanimously passed by Parliament. Each and every part and section of this act was unanimously consented to, and that's very important. So, why did Parliament pass this act? So, as we all know, and as you said, there's a construction boom in the country. There are many applications, and this directly leads to many applications to the Central Housing and Planning Authority. And these applications, many of us all know. We've been dealing with them. At least every single citizen has been dealing with them. So it's like, for change of use, you need an application. For any building permit, you need an application. For changing from residential to commercial, agriculture to commercial or residential, all of these things, you need to submit an application. And with the construction boom, this directly led to an increase. Now, 30 years ago, you didn't have so much houses or in the country. And at that time, this is the system that we used to work with. And even at that time, it was very difficult. So think about now, 30 years after, when in this country we have so much going on. The country is transforming, as we all know. For example, Parfait Harmony, a new housing scheme. You have almost 15,000 households. You have Diamond, another 15,000 households. And you have so much new schemes coming up. So that is the problem right there. And the government is aware of this problem. So to address this, the government has decided, okay, let's get one single system to address it. Because before, what you had to work with is citizens' notice. You had to go to all these various agencies. And what this act will encapsulate is a cooperation of almost 15 agencies. These include from the Central Board of Health, the Central Housing and Planning Authority, you have the Lands and Deeds Registry, you have Lands and Surveys. All of these agencies are involved and they will be cooperating. Now before, a citizen had to go to each agency separately. That's how tedious it was. That's how torturous this was. Many persons would submit an application. We all know this. Many of you probably, even Richard, you probably did it at some point in time. And instead of taking weeks or months, you'll end up taking years. Now, sometimes you go to one of these agencies and they'll tell you probably the application is lost. It's sitting on someone's desk. Or you might even have to pay a bribe. And that's the reality of what's going on in the country. And the government is very much aware of this. And that is why they've decided to put all of this into what we call a single window system. A single platform where citizens just need to go, submit an application, you pay, and that goes through and you get an approval. All the agencies have to cooperate. Right? And that is essentially why the government or Parliament passed this legislation.
Right, and there's two things stood out there for me is you mentioned that there are 15 agencies, and I believe this is listed in a schedule
Yes.
within the act. And if you would just permit me to highlight some more of those agencies in addition to what you mentioned, or maybe I could read it out. So, like you said, there's the Central Board of Health, the Ministry of Public Works, the River and Sea Defense Board, the Guyana Lands and Surveys Commission, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Guyana Fire Service, the Guyana Civil Aviation Authority, National Trust of Guyana, the Guyana Office for Investment, the Land Registry, the Deeds and Commercial Registries Authority, Guyana Water Incorporated, Maritime Administration Department, Guyana Forestry Commission, and all local democratic organs. So that is a wide and varying list, of course. And the second thing that you mentioned, well, that I would have gathered from what you're saying, this now takes the system electronically. It takes the system online. So you lodge your documents or your applications, and it is uploaded to an electronic platform. So nobody can say, oh, they lost your thing or they misplaced your thing, and you have to run around getting your copies or whatever, right? Okay. So that's actually a very good explanation as to why this is important. But if I could just pick your brain a little more to get into the object of the act.
Right. So, Richard, before I go into the objects of the act, if you would permit me to digress a little. So you use the word here, the schedule. Now, I was involved in some training for the Ministry of Marine Affairs recently, and it was observed or made clear that not many citizens understand. They hear about acts, they hear about legislation, but they don't actually know how to navigate one of these documents. And we have thousands of them in the country. So they say ignorance of the law is no excuse. So where to start? You have to know to read one of these. Now, so if you look at this document, the front here will have the act number and the name of the act. And right after that is what we call the content page. Now this is where all attorneys start. You may want to think attorneys read all of these acts, or we're supposed to read all of these acts. But no. A very important tool for us is the content page. And this is what we advise all citizens to do. It may be tedious to read from start to the back of the act, which you should do, but I know many people will want to sleep away if they have to read the entire act. So the first place to start is the content page. And you'll see numbers here. These numbers refer to sections. They refer to sections. All the paragraphs in these acts are what we call sections. And then the act is divided into what we call headings. The headings are what we call parts. So you might hear someone or an attorney referring, okay, in this act, in the single window act which I have before me, Part 2, Section 3. Now, before you have to go through all of these pages, you just go to the content page, Part 2, Section 3, and then you just turn to the page. Now, right after that content page, you have what we call a long title. It gives the purpose or the goal of the act. Right? And after that is a short title which says enacted by the part. This act may be cited as the Planning and Development Single Window System Act. And very importantly, in every piece of legislation, you have what is called the interpretation section. That gives you the definition of some key terms in the legislation. Mind you, not all the terms will be in there. Some may be found in other acts, other legislation, for example, the Interpretation and General Clauses Act. And another key part is what we call schedule, which Richard just mentioned. He was listing some. So schedules are normally found at the back of the act, and they normally include forms. So for this act that we have before us, you have 4 schedules. The number 1 schedule lists the type of applications that we will deal with, and those type of applications that this act governs are what I started listing earlier, but I'll just list them out for the benefit of the viewers. Those include the single-family residential applications, multifamily residential, including low-rise apartments, townhouses, and condominiums, commercial applications, industrial applications, institutional applications, infrastructure, change of use as mentioned before, land subdivision, which you normally have to go to the Central Board of Health for, agriculture, recreation, and demolition of buildings or structures. all 11 of these applications are what will be dealt with by this act in one single platform. And that's the first schedule. The second schedule is what Richard just listed, the 15 agencies that will have to cooperate. And then you have the third schedule, which my colleague will explain later on, which is the form for appeals, and the fourth schedule deals with repeals. Previously, you had certain sections on the differing acts, for instance, the Town and Country Planning Act, but now this act takes precedence. So, the object, going back to the object, Richard.
Yes.
So what this act is trying to achieve is what you said before. One single platform for you to submit and receive. And that's the entirety. That's the simple part of it. One single platform, you submit your application and you receive your approval. Now, the other objects of this act is for cooperation among the agencies. And aside from that, so who will be spearheading this? That is why I was pointing to the interpretation section. So this helps the viewers to understand certain terms. And one of those terms is the central authority. The Act defines a central authority as a central housing and planning authority. So they will be spearheading this operation, this act, this everything they will start. It starts from the central authority. And all of these 15 agencies that Richard listed will have to cooperate to further the objectives of this act. And that's essentially the object in a nutshell, Richard.
Okay, thank you for that elaborate explanation there, Tikram, especially on how to go through the act and understand its components. So, if I might just bring Ms. Shepherd in here a little, if you could just take us through how does this single window system work? Because this is a major question for persons. You arrive, where do you go? You know, you arrive at a desk and you give everybody a thing and say, okay, this is all my applications. When should I come back here? How does it work?
Yes, thank you, Richard. So, how does the system work? You heard my colleague, it's called a single window system. What it does essentially is, first you have to become a user of the system. So to become a user, you make an application, and you can do so electronically or you can do so physically at the central authority. You would have heard my colleague, he explained what is the central authority, which is Central Planning Authority, Central Housing and Planning Authority. So you can go there physically, make your application, or you can do so online. After you make an application, the central authority will approve you as a user of the system. When you're approved as a user of the system, you submit your application. So whatever the application is, and you would have heard my colleagues list out all the various applications you can make on the system. So let's say, for example, you have a piece of agricultural land that you were issued by the Guyana Lands and Survey Commission, and you want to convert that to a residential use. You want to build residential properties. So you can make an application to change the use of that land. So you will make an application for that through the system, and though it will engage all the other agencies. When you make your application, you submit it there and all the supporting documents. And when you do so, all the other agency will be able to access these documents to give their approval. So it becomes a single system where you submit all your documents and the decision is a single decision as well. So this is the one system that deals with everything. They receive your document, they go through it. If they need additional documents, they let you know through that system. And like Richard and Tikram have said, it takes away from the hassle of having to run to, say, Guyana Lands and Survey or EPA or any other agency. Everything will be done through the system. So after you submit your documents and the relevant authorities are pleased with what is before them, they make a decision. So if it is that they're satisfied, they will approve your application and you get your permit. Whatever approval you submitted your application for, you get that. So our if they're not satisfied, it can go the other way, which I'll talk about later, and how you can approach that. So after you get your approval, no, sorry, prior to that, what the system does also, it caters for payment through this one platform. So that takes away the hassle of you having to go, say, the NDC or EPA or Guyana Lands and Survey. You make your payments through this single window system as well. And the system is very modern. So the Act established a platform where you can make payments through various methods. You can use a credit card, debit card, money transfer, whatever, various means. It's a wide variety of methods you can utilize to make payments. So when you make your payment there, let's say the NDC requires a certain fee for a certain approval, they will be paid through that platform. So you now don't have to go to the NDC to physically make payments. So again, it's very efficient. It's intended to take away all the hassle, as we're all aware of. I'm sure some of you may have to be going back and forth from different agencies, and you were probably very frustrated and so on. You have a loan in the bank and it's running and it started to run and you still haven't gotten your approval, or you probably already finished building your property and you still haven't gotten your approval. So it is intended to take away all of that so that you're moving in an efficient manner, in an orderly way. So Richard, that is pretty much in a nutshell how the system works.
Right. Thank you, Patricia. So you've mentioned that there must be an applicant.
Right.
And this is the person applying for the permission.
Yes.
And you've mentioned that the governing authority or the authority to which the applicant applies might approve or reject their application. So what happens now? You've mentioned you went through the system, which was well done, but I must pick your brain to ask you now, what happens if an applicant is not pleased with the decision of the authority?
Right. So you submit your application. There might be some instances where the relevant authorities think that you haven't satisfied the requirements to be given the approval which you sought. So what happens is the Act establishes an appeal tribunal. This tribunal is, it will be staffed with the chairman and 4 other persons. They have various requirements that needs to be satisfied before these persons can be employed by this tribunal. So that is also a rigorous program, and is also several requirements to be satisfied before that starts to work. So I say that because I want the public to know that it's not just anybody that will sit there. There are requirements to be fulfilled before that person is approved to sit on the tribunal. So what the tribunal does is, let's say you're an applicant and it's a decision that you're not pleased with. Your approval was not granted. So you can file a notice of appeal. And you have to do so within 28 days after you were given that decision for which you're not satisfied with. So when you file the notice of appeal, this goes back to the central authority. And then from there, they take that and they will give you a date for hearing. So the whole process of the appeal is very short as well. It's not as long as we know it in the court system. So the Act says that it must be dealt with within 3 months. So if you're dissatisfied with your decision, you can expect to get a decision from the appeal tribunal within 3 months after dissatisfaction or after filing your notice of appeal.
Okay, I heard this word tribunal. So if you could simplify that term there for persons, so I know they would understand. Is it like a court-like setting or mediation type setting? So persons could understand exactly what they're going to. Like, what would this look like?
It is similar, but not as rigorous as a court system. So you file your notice of appeal, you get a date for hearing. They may ask you to bring supporting evidence to show why they should make a different decision. And you will come there and present your case to whoever is sitting on the tribunal, and they will look at your documents and hear what you're saying, and they will decide whether they can vary the original decision or whether it will stand, and they will maintain what was given before.
And you don't need an attorney.
No, you can file your notice of appeal. The Act has a form in Schedule 3, as Tikram would have shown you, and you utilize that form to file your notice of appeal.
Okay. So there is a corrective process there as well, in the
Yes.
event that persons are not quite satisfied.
Right.
So, if we could move on to our next component of the Act, the implementation. So if you could just take me through, what is the standard used for the implementation of the Act or the system, the single window system?
Yes, Richard, certainly. But before we get to that, I just want to add, so for the appeal process as well, the decision from that process is final, unless cabinet decides that it's something in national interest, and then they can take a different decision. So let's say you went and you got your decision reversed. That decision is final and it cannot be challenged. It is only cabinet can decide, I can change this.
So you cannot seek a judicial redress?
No, it's final.
Okay.
And I also want to add, there's an avenue for, I would say, a leeway for you to get better timelines. So let's say you submit your application and for some reason you're doing it online and the system crashed because of a technical difficulty. So what the Act caters for, it will treat, so when you go and you resubmit your application, it treats your submission date as if it was submitted at the original date when the system would have crashed. So that is also a good thing. So you are not met with long timelines.
Right, you're not creating a new application. Right. Okay.
So
to my question.
To your question,
the
standard. So this system, the single window system, it has to be in line with an international standard. So in terms of the procedure, documents, the technical details, all have to be in line with an internationally accepted standard. What this does, it means that it has to be transparent. It ensures that your whatever documents you submit, it remains confidential. So, and then the system itself is meant to be simple and accessible, so anybody can be able to access it and utilize the system. And most importantly, it ensures that the system ensures that things are done in an efficient manner, which is the whole purpose of the single window system, because like we all would have established, it takes away from the hassle and all that prolonged timeline to get approvals for planning and development.
Okay, thank you, Patricia. So we've went through a lot in relation to the Act. I know it's not a large piece of legislation. It's some 25 pages, including the content page as well. And but I think we've covered some good ground there, and some things that stand out to me, especially in relation to the payments. You said that all payments will be done at this singular window.
Yes.
And it would be dispersed to the relevant agencies where the payments are required. I think this is a revolutionary initiative there to be able to make payments, because nobody can tell you, hey, you gotta left for something before this thing could get done.
Yeah, and you even don't have to go there physically. You can do so online.
Okay.
And if at Section 8 of the Act lists out all the means by which you can make payments. So we have credit cards, debit cards, mobile money transfer, debiting an e-wallet account, real-time gross settlement, electronic fund transfer, online banking. So these are all means that does not require you to physically go before someone to make a payment. So like you said, Richard, it takes away from like we Guyanese would say, leave something. It takes away from that. So and it makes it more efficient, and it certainly takes away from you having to run from the NDC and the Guyana Land Survey, and then you have to go to EP and all the other agencies that you usually have to visit to get one permit.
Right. So I think Richard, one major thing we forgot to point out is that we're hearing about online system. A very important thing to note is that the government is aware that not everyone has access to the internet. Now, Guyana is a very large country. You have portions in Letem, all parts in the interior. Now, those persons might ask, so what about us who don't have access to the internet? So the government, being aware of this problem, has put in the legislation that it could either be done virtually, so you could do it from the palm of your hand, through a phone, through any computer, tablet, whatever be the case, or you could still do so paper-based, which is to submit a physical application to the central authority. Now, that there allows any person, and I'm sure when this is implemented, you won't have to travel to Georgetown. I'm sure they will come up with some plan as to have offices in the different regions, so you don't have to travel to Georgetown to submit an application. Right? But the virtual system is there, and that allows anyone from any part of the world, because it's not just Guyanese who are residing here, you have our diaspora out there. So this system allows you to sit in your home and make this application and receive the responses. And just to give you a little more idea of how this is supposed to work, the best case scenario is that you sit in your home, you make this application, you make the online payment, and within weeks or months, you receive an approval. That's the best case scenario. Now, you will have a situation, let's say you submit your application, you've made your payment. However, it reaches to the desk of probably EPA. Now, EPA might have further requirements. What it does, the system will put your application on pause. It will notify you of all the requirements or the relevant requirements that EPA wants. And once you provide that, your application proceeds. And so on, depending on what other agencies want, until it finally is approved. And that's how simple this is. You sit in your home and you submit, and that's what we want. To get away from this torture and from having to go to bribe someone and wait years, and then we're sitting there losing money. Businesses are suffering because they have loans, and you're waiting on all of these permissions.
Right. And that bureaucratic nature that we're accustomed to, it could actually be a deterrent to business and projects, because if you're not getting your approval, and you might as well just give up, right? So
Yep.
so this is something that is much needed, and I think it is quite timely given the rapid development that the countries are currently undergoing in terms of infrastructure and building. So we've spoken a lot about what the Act does and what it enables,
Yes.
and how the deficiencies that it remedies, and how you could seek redress if you are not satisfied with a decision of the authority. But it's something I would like to zone in on now. We've said that yes, this is going to stamp out any corruption which may have existed within the system. Anybody saying left something, and it will eliminate that bureaucratic process. But what checks and balances are in place for this single window system?
Yes, Richard. So the Act the government considered that, and what the Act does, it establishes a committee. It's called an oversight committee. That committee would be set up for that check and balances. So what it does is it oversees the process, the daily operations of the system. It monitors it, and if any deficiency is highlighted, it will make sure that things are working in an orderly manner and it's efficient as it should be. And if that is not the case, they will advise the minister on how to fix those deficiencies. So the committee is there for that. And it also will assist the minister to implement policies. So whatever deficiencies is highlighted, and the committee advises the minister, well, this is the problem and this is how we can fix it. And the minister decides, okay, this is how we are going to go ahead to make it work in an orderly manner or more efficient. The committee is there to help to implement that, whatever it is, to make it work better.
Right, and to who would the committee be comprised of, if you could?
So just like the tribunal, the appeal tribunal, it is a lot of requirements to set up that as well. It consists of various persons that will be employed through a certain channel. They have to satisfy specific requirements before they can be attached to that committee. So it is a similar process. It is not just anybody that will sit on the committee. There are requirements that needs to be satisfied.
All right, thank you. And as we're down in the end of the program, I will just give both of you, Ms. Shepherd and Mrs. Singh, the opportunity to share your views or comments, which I might have missed or not been able to prompt. So if we could start, I don't know who wants to start. Yes, Patricia.
All right. So one thing that I want to add, I said that the decision of the appeal tribunal would be final, and I also said that unless cabinet declares otherwise, but it's not just unless cabinet declares otherwise. It has to be something that is in the national interest. So what is in the national interest? How do we answer that question? So the best way to explain it is for me to give an example. So let's say we know Guyana is moving in a fast-paced way in terms of development and so on. Let's say we are about to build a bridge across the Essequibo River. We all know the hassle that the people living there have to face to get to and from. The speedboats stop working at a certain time. Sometimes they have to stand on the selling for a long time and so forth. Of course, that's something that those people would want. So let's say the permit for that was denied, and it goes to appeal, and they upheld that decision. So what cabinet or the responsible government can do is decide, oh, this is something that is in the national interest. This is something that benefits the citizen, and then they can decide, okay, this is something we can provide. This is a permit that we can provide. So we have that option there.
So let's just reverse that situation. Given that we have a practical case here we're working with.
Yes.
Let's flip it around to say that a bridge is being built.
Yes.
And it falls on somebody's property.
Right.
Or somebody applied to develop a land space, and the bridge is going to be right there, and so they were rejected for that. That application was rejected
because it falls on somebody's property.
The application was for their development was rejected because a bridge is going to be right
where
there,
somebody's property is,
and so they were refused, and they appeal, and their appeal was not successful, and let's say they try to get the cabinet to change decision, but the cabinet could say that, okay, this bridge is within our national interest, and therefore this is the best decision.
Yes, that is precisely it. So cabinet will look at the circumstances, and it has to be something that is in the national interest. And if they decide that it is something that will benefit the people of Guyana, it is for our development, then yes.
Okay.
Yeah. One thing, Richard, I think we should all note, and I think as Guyanese we experience is sometimes you submit an application and you get rejected, but that application may be rejected rightfully so. Because in the name it tells you it's a Planning and Development Single Window Act. Now if a certain area is allocated for residential purpose, and now you're coming, let's say you're going to change your residential purpose for agriculture, now obviously we have a problem. Similarly, if it's under agriculture, and then you're changing to residential, you will have a problem. I see many times, and we all see this if you travel along the country, you'll have persons who own rice fields. Now, they will go, sometimes even without the permit, and build their houses. Now, what happens? We burn rice fields in Guyana. That smoke and that fire, everything comes to your residence, and now you go and complain. But first of all, first, you didn't even apply for the permit. And two, even if you applied, you will be rejected because you're going in an area that's not in the planning for it. You can't put residential if there's obviously agriculture there. And that's plaguing the country. So there will be instances where situations like that happen. And so one thing I forgot to point out as well is that in many instances, and this tells you how torturous this process is, many instances you have persons who submitted applications, and because it took years, and many viewers out there would attest to this, they probably went ahead and billed in violation of the law. But that is what is the reality right now. Because these applications are taking so long, sometimes you don't even have the money to pay a bribe. So, because they're taking so long, many people go ahead and build, houses already built, businesses set up, and then the authorities come and say, so where's your permission? And all you have to tell them is that, well, I've applied for it, but up to now it's not granted. And that's the reality here. So that's how important this piece of legislation is to avoid that type of situation.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ms. Shepherd and Mrs. Singh. I know we had quite a good discussion today. Not much technicalities within the act. But before you go, I must ask: are there any offences within the act? Because that's a major part of this show here, to enlighten persons whether there are penalties or offenses. But I guess given the nature of this legislation here, that wouldn't be so.
So while I was perusing the act, I noticed offenses, but it's not for the applicants. It is more to keep the personnel in check, the persons who are gonna operate the machinery, to make sure again that it's working in an efficient way.
Okay. So that brings us to the end of this week's episode. As you know, this program, Simplifying the Law, is an initiative by the Government of Guyana, executed through the Attorney General Chambers and Ministry of Legal Affairs, where we seek to educate and enlighten the populace on laws that are being enacted and even laws that are already in existence. We break it down. We have experts on the show who come to explain the tedious aspects of legislation, which the ordinary layman might not be able to understand. Under many laws, there are offenses and penalties which are there in existence. Sometimes they are not executed or administered, but they're there, and many persons commit these offenses, or they break the law on a daily basis, and they're not aware. But like you've rightfully mentioned, ignorance of the law is no defense. So this program here seeks to fill that gap, whereby we feature persons from the Attorney General Chambers and Ministry of Legal Affairs, State Council and Parliamentary Council and other staff. We would have persons from the private bar, members of religious organizations, and general experts who could go through legislation and break it down for us. Until next time, I hope this has been an engaging episode and you have learned quite a bit. Thank you, Ms. Shepherd, and thank you, Mrs. Singh, for being on the program and doing such a wonderful job. Until next time, I am your host, Richard Bainey. See you then.